to Talking It Out. I'm Jonathan Geffner, and my special guest today is James Vrettos. James, or Jim, as I know him, as a personal friend as well, is a teacher, professor, philosopher, and creative thinker who has been on a lifelong mission to try to help make our world a better place. And as part of that quest, he hosts a video interview series called The Radical Imagination. I'm also happy to say that, as I mentioned, Jim is a friend of mine, and I welcome you, Jim, to Talking It Out.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. It is a real pleasure, a blessing to be on. I know you've been on my show, The Radical Imagination, a few times, and I look forward to being on your show as well.
It's always very interesting to talk with you because I find that we seem to drift off into interesting tangents, which is kind of fun. And, even you had me on as a guest to talk about my ventriloquist career and films that I was producing and so forth. But we get into all kinds of little tangents, which always turn out to be interesting because you have that kind of a mind, which appeals to me. Hence, I guess, the radical imagination, the very inspiration for your show.
And we are both Jewish, and isn't that part of what being Jewish is about, to take off on all kinds of tangents and discuss and debate? And
That Talmudic history.
Talmudic history, and you are Mr. Radical Imagination as well. It's the radical imagination of Trillo and Suede. We're doing similar sorts of things. We're creating, with your brilliant technique and talent, a transformative world with your radical imagination.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And
I mean it.
Well,
and that's what attracted me so much to your just wonderful series, and just following your work and being transported into this wonderful world where you can you have so many fascinating characters and stories that take you out of this world, and yet are extremely important learning experiences. And it's just fun and very funny and very very wonderful to view.
Well, thank you. I'm glad that you appreciate it and enjoy it. But tell us a little about your background, where you grew up, and what led you to the paths that you've taken in your life.
I mean, I'm a New York City kid coming from an artistic background. My grandfather studied in the Royal Academy in Dresden, Germany. And I understand you just took a trip, not to Germany, but you were sort of nearby, right? You were in Romania. Okay,
Romania, yes. I was on a really wonderful little vacation, around 8 or 9 days, with my younger daughter, Sabrina, who's a filmmaker and involved in a lot of creative things herself. And so just two of us, daddy-daughter trip. And
I saw some of the pictures.
Yeah.
Here we go again on some tangents, but it's not a tangent. We, in a sense, have feelings for, in a way, generally that part of the world, in a sense. So my maternal grandparents are from Russia. This was prior to World War I. Both of them separately, obviously, went to study in Dresden, Germany. My father my grandfather as an art student in the Royal Academy, and my grandmother also was sent by her family to study because she happened to come from a very wealthy family, and her family was actually rightfully worried that she would be joining. She had leanings toward the revolution and transformation in Russia, and so I grew up hearing that from the very beginning, the life of the peasants and Jews struggling to escape and find their freedom and so on. So this is mother's milk and grandmother's milk, and this is what I was raised in. And so it was a natural outgrowth of the show I do now, the work, the activism I've been involved in my entire life, my scholarly work, and so on and so on, is just more or less an outgrowth of those early childhood experiences, in a sense.
Now, how long have you been doing the Radical Imagination? When did that series begin?
It's now over 8 years old, and I just sort of fell into that. I was doing an event. I was chairing an event at the Left Forum about 8 years ago, and it was actually a terrific event. The guests, I think we had Tom Hayden and Fiona Davis, Angela Davis's sister, Carl Hart, trying to think of Cornel West, I think was on, and so on. And make a long story short, the head of the Manhattan Neighborhood Network, El Barrio studios, which you've been to, saw the show and said, "Hey, why don't you do a show?" I saw the event that I was
Mm.
chairing and said, "Let's do the show." And I had not had any sort of experience in this media world, and so sort of fell into it. And the last 8 years have been really, it's been a exciting venture and had some terrific people on, and it's been a lot of fun and
Yeah.
hopefully interesting.
Yes, well, it certainly is for anybody to check out. We'll have the link underneath it,
Sure.
underneath this video for other people to check it out and subscribe. So, how many have you counted? How many episodes you've done all through these years?
No, I haven't, and for better or worse, I hardly look at the shows once I've done it. It's I don't know. It's
Uh,
just it's done, and we're on to the next one. And I think about it, of course, and try to be better and this and that. But no, I've not counted. I know we've had an incredible diversity of people on this sort of like your characters too. You know, the my goodness, you have Chloe Cliche and Mrs. Kaminsky and so on and so on, Rabbi, and I've tried to have a foundation for the show which includes people from all walks of life: politicians, academics, scholars, comedians, musicians, and so on and so on, dancers who exhibit an interest in a transformative world. Now, that's a very general statement there, but it's a world that's realizing we need change. We need, and now again, that's a very general term too, but I've tried to focus on transformative change in a progressive sense that include a certain set of intellectual, moral, political, economic values, which transcend political parties. It's not about Democrats and Republicans and liberals and conservatives. I've had Reverend William Barber of the Poor People's Campaign on, for example. I like the way he puts it. These words are too puny. It's about human rights. It's about humanity, and it's interesting. We're doing this show today on Memorial Day, right? And
Yes.
the the millions upon millions upon millions of people around the world that have lost their lives and been wounded. And no disrespect to the soldiers here, but again, one has to ask for what? What purpose are we? Do we in fact have a safer world? Do we have a transformative world where we do care and love and are able to give more? And I think the simple answer, if you've got to be fair about it, is no. And
Yes.
I've got to throw this back to you a little bit because we are friends and we are so good friends and so on. We love the Marx Brothers. So on this Memorial Day, all love and respect and blessings to those fallen soldiers. But everyone watch Duck Soup. All right.
Classic Marx Brothers movie. For those of you who are not
Yes,
familiar with the Marx Brothers, that's a classic Marx Brothers film.
but it's more than it's one of the greatest anti-war movies around. It shows the absurdity, the inanity, the use of it's brilliant. And so I just wanted to say that.
Right. Yeah, that's very appropriate for today. And one of the things that I liked about you immediately, as when we first met and started to talk, and the whole format of your own show, The Radical Imagination, is that I liked the way that you approach this whole quest about trying to improve the world for as many people as possible. And because the thing is that although you do come to it, the whole topic from a left-wing perspective, it's something that you don't exclude anybody, and you are very inclusive in your quest. That is to say that people can be very polarized, whether left or right wing, and they have very definite ideas and beliefs about how the world should be changed. But the thing is that you always search for, as I understand it, a common denominator to draw in people to let's find what we all have in common, and like the things we should all agree on, like that people in general, we want to avoid war, eliminate war as much as possible. We want to provide opportunities for people to live fulfilled lives and in peace, and as much kind of personal fulfillment as possible. These kind of things, that these should be all-inclusive values. And then the question is, well, how best to go about that, right?
Yeah, yeah, and you throw in the left. I mean, my goodness, the left have been fights among itself. It destroys itself. It gets into crazy battles, and had enough of that too. But let me again invoke our brothers, the Marx brothers.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, back in 1968, when you had the student rebellions and the demonstrations, and in France in particular, what were they marching for? Je suis a Marxist of the Groucho variety.
Right. There was
All right.
a poster I remember way back in my youth, and there was a kind of revival of Marx Brothers beginning, and there was a famous poster of Marx and Lenin, and it had, of course, Groucho Marx and John Lennon. So I like that.
But that's
Very
not to say
timely.
that Carl wasn't important and did not have some valuable lessons. And you're right. I try to bring in a diversity of people. I try to seek commonality among all of us. We are of the same species in a sense. We are human beings. We feel we're not all that different in a sense. If you allow me a brief little plug, I'm
Hmm.
doing a show 2 weeks from now. Let's see, the 14th, which will be shown on the 25th, Sunday, with Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Mm.
And I, as a child of the 60s, of course, well, I shouldn't say of course, but I was very attracted to his father's campaign and candidacy, identified with it enormously. And I still feel that he was the one politician, certainly one white politician, that could have brought this country together. He had grown enormously
Mm.
during the 60s and so on, so on, so on. So that was then. This is now. I'm I'm so curious as to where his son is at, and
Mm.
what legacy he brings, and where is he going to go with that. I understand, and I know I've seen some of his interviews. He's a very serious, thoughtful person. And I look forward very much to the dialogue. And I know
Uh,
that, yeah, he
I,
also,
I'm
go, go
sorry.
ahead.
I just wanted to
Sure.
mention that I also really like him. What I've seen of him, I like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. His approach. He's such a non-politician, so refreshing
Yeah.
change, and he also reminds me of you. And not surprising that you are attracted to him in the fact that although I mean he's a Democrat, I
Yeah.
assume that I believe he identifies as liberal, probably in most areas, but he's not dogmatic, and he's a free thinker, and he
Yes.
thinks out of the box, and I know that he's attracting some Republicans too, who seem to appreciate the fact that he bucks the system, any system, whether it's controlled by Democrats or Republicans. He's still a free thinker, and he doesn't necessarily toe the line.
I agree with you. And I'm going to bring up the topic that I think has gotten him into a certain amount of controversy, but I absolutely plan to ask him and give him full reign. Let's hear his position on the vaccines and
Yes.
COVID, because this is something I know that people on the left, the right, are concerned about. And we need to have clarification, and we need to have a serious talk about it. And I respect, although I've had my boosters, I am a believer in it. I want to hear what he has to say. I don't think so I look forward to giving him that forum and letting him have free reign on the explanation, because the audience, we as Americans and the citizens of the world, need to hear this. You're right. We
Absolutely.
don't get that
Hmm.
from the
Yes.
political and cultural milieu that we're living in. So
Mm.
that's what I try to do in the show. And I think you, in your own way, tries to do that too.
Yes, well, I see a commonality there. I look forward I'm definitely going to watch that, because that should be a really fascinating interview, and he's a very important voice right now, I think.
I think so.
So you also have done a lot of teaching through the years, and I believe you teach at John Jay now.
I taught, well, I guess, over 25 years at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. Without getting into the whole song and dance, I am a sociologist who studied under one of the leading sociologists of the 60s, Richard Cloward, who was also a community organizer, and along with Francis Fox Piven, started and helped organize the welfare rights movement. So from the very beginning of my graduate work, I saw the relationship between solid academic work and activism that was designed to better the lot of millions of people. So, long story short, again, Cloward, as a sociologist and as a social worker, also had his one of his major works, Delinquency and Opportunity, ironically, also presented to the Kennedy administration, and it became the first war on poverty program, Mobilization for Youth, which is an attempt to prevent juvenile delinquency. So, studying with him, mentoring my mentor, I also began interested in this field of criminology, the sociology of deviance, and then proceeded to teach many, many years at John Jay, and also did have a tour of duty at Yeshiva University for about 10 years, which I found very, very enlightening. As you know, I'm not an observant Jew, but I had the time of my life. I respected these students, and it was an enlightening period. I had a lot of interesting guests that probably would have never gotten to Yeshiva University. I brought in people. The students appreciated it very, very much. Administration, not so much. Yeah, but
at Yeshiva University, what
yeah.
subjects specifically were you teaching there?
Well, I was obviously I was in the secular arena. I was teaching sociology and criminology. I started the internship program there in criminal justice. I also organized a number of different events, and to try to open up the discussion with people like Rabbi Michael Lerner, who would have never been invited by anybody to speak, and I thought the students appreciated it. I had
I'm sorry, I want to interrupt for a moment, just for those
sure,
who don't know. Why do you say that Michael Lerner would not have otherwise been
Oh, I
invited?
should have said, well, he is a controversial figure in the Jewish world, and his magazine, he's the editor of the magazine Tikkun, comes from a tradition in which he's seen as someone who advocates peace and does talk about the Israeli government as in a way that is often not mentioned at a place like Yeshiva.
You mean
And that
critical, being critical of it?
critical, yeah, that's
Yeah.
what I'm trying to say. I also had a brilliant guest who was an Israeli soldier who was part of the movement to stop the infiltration, the bombings on the West Bank. Refusnik, he was part of a Refusnik group. And again, the students came up after and said, listen, we don't agree with everything this guy is saying, but thank you so very, very much for having this fellow on. And he was a veteran of the Israeli Defense Force, a proud supporter. He was a Zionist, and yet he was one of the leaders of the Refusniks who did not feel it was his duty to go over to the West Bank and in retaliation bomb Palestinian families in their homes, and because of some action that a younger member, let's say, of that family had done. Mm-hmm. I welcome that sort of dialogue. I think it's very important to have at all sorts of levels.
Do you have a favorite experience or most memorable experience in all your teaching experiences of either a particular course that you taught, or a particular group of students, or some event that coincided with your teaching that sticks in your mind?
Going back to Yeshiva, I took them on a tour of Rikers Island, in which we we had yeshiva had a connection. One of the chaplains there was uh, at yeshiva was also a chaplain at Rikers, and we did take a tour, such as it is, of the facility, talking specifically with the Jewish inmates. And that was quite a revelation. The students, I still have students to this day, and this was many years ago, say, thank you so very, very much for that experience. And this is one of the things they remember so much. I learned a lot from them. I remember a particular young fellow who I taught a course. You mentioned the course. I would have to say the course I taught that I think I was most happy about was a course on Black Jewish relations. And I know you touch on this in your own show.
Mm,
And the book, we use the book by Cornel West and Rabbi Michael Lerner,
mm,
Blacks and Jews, Let the Healing Begin. And it was a tremendously wonderful experience for me, for the students. I had guests come in from all kinds of backgrounds and so on. And this was a real revelation. And it was an eye opener. And it was just not textbook stuff and memorize this and
mm,
let's pass the exam. This was a transformative experience.
mm,
And I like to believe that, well, not so much me, but Lerner and West had that debate. And we tried to do that in the class. And I remember one follower of Meyer Kahane in the class saying to me as we were talking about some issue, and he said, and he was very, very emotive about it. He said, "Never again, never again." And I said, "I agree with you, but we've got to figure out how we relate to each other so it never happens again." So that was the sort of
mm.
thinking that I like to do, and as a teacher, I try to do that, and so on.
In that particular topic, since you brought it up, I wonder if you have a takeaway from that whole discussion and debate about that very thorny issue of Black Jewish relations in particular. Is there some kind of approach or idea of how to go about improving that relationship? Or I mean, I know it's a very thorny issue, so I don't know if it's
Why?
fair to
Why
ask you to
is
summarize it.
I don't see it as thorny at all.
Really?
I
Okay.
see it as natural. The prophetic tradition within Judaism, the ancient slaves, the identification that Blacks and Martin Luther King and the use of the prophetic tradition, the Hebrew scriptures by Reverend Barber, holding up the Torah with Susanna Heschel on the show.
Mm,
This is they're natural allies. The fascists, the neo-Nazis, they go after Jews, they go after Blacks, they go Gypsies, all non-Aryan. So we're all in this together. I love Barber's depiction of this as fusion politics. We need to not be at each other's throats and be divided and conquered by the system, but to realize that we have these common needs and goals. And he called it fusion politics. He himself is trying to bring in white hardline conservatives in the South with Southern Blacks. They're both getting screwed
hmm
by the system. And
Right.
someone like a DeSantis, to use names,
Mm,
becomes this demagogic figure. And of course, Trump was a master of it. And that's been the case throughout history. These demagogic politicians, whatever you want to call them, leaders have kept their power using this sort of tactic and so on. So I see this as Blacks and Jews as natural allies. I think there are extremes on both sides. There's fears,
hmm
there's past traumas, which you, again, I keep bringing back because I love your show so much and your work. You touch on these issues in such a wonderfully human, funny way, and satiric and heartfelt, and you're just a master at that. And I think you do such great work bridging the gap and showing us how we can laugh at each other. And I think
mm.
that's a big part of it.
Thank you.
We
I
need
think that how people are perceived, especially group politics, how groups of people are perceived, can be a big problem. When I mentioned thorny issue, I was thinking particularly about that group perceptions. People are lumped into categories and thought of that, in particular with Jews, not just Jewish Black relations, but Jews in general, and the rise in anti-Semitism lately. I believe a lot of that is because, or one part of that is because Jews are perceived as part of the oppressor class, as by certain minorities, as whites who oppress. One of the ironic things about that a lot of people are not aware of is that it's fairly recent, it's very recent in history, in the long scope, that Jews are even considered white, because Jews were not considered whites. They certainly weren't considered whites by the Nazis or anti-Semites through the ages, through the centuries. It's really only in the 20th century that they began to be perceived as whites and lumped in as whites. So, these kind of labels on people often create barriers between people.
You're absolutely right. And of course, in Israel too, we're talking mainly majority are Sephardic Jews, right?
Right. Yes.
I couldn't agree with you more. I've had discussions, I've had groups on Jews for Economic Political Justice, I think they're called, Voices, Jewish Voice for Peace. I disagree with some of those statements. I do very much. I push back on it. I think it's there are extreme arguments on the left that are just as damaging as some on the right, far right as well.
Yeah, I agree. And that also makes me wonder, in general, what is your assessment? This is like a big question. I just feel like throwing it out to do it with whatever you want with it. But what is your assessment of our society today, Western society, where we live in particular, about where it stands? I mean, there's so many issues that people are fighting about all the time, but like everyone knows we have a lot of problems. Let's focus right here in America in particular, in society, cultural wars and things like that. But do you have an overall, like a summary assessment of where you think we stand, like where we've gone wrong and what we need to do as a society to improve our society? I know it's a huge topic. Maybe you can take one aspect of that.
Well, Gandhi was reportedly, when asked the question, what did he think of Western civilization? The story is that he said, well, that would be a nice idea. The idea was, well, yeah, I think what we need to do across the board, whether it's individuals, whether it's groups, whether it's dealing with our history, dealing with this Memorial Day and so on, is to not be afraid to explore our past traumas and hurts. Working with James Gilligan, the psychiatrist, my colleague, over and over again points out, and it's common sense too, hurt people hurt others. And so we're still dealing with traumas, individual, personal, collective, that get displaced and projected on destructive ways, in self-destructive ways, destructive ways. We can talk about it in grand terms, in terms of imperialism, of colonialism, and then we get lost in that sort of lingo. But the truth is, there is an American empire. There is a militaristic stance to our foreign policy. We should, not that one group or the other has absolute truth on it. Let's have an open discussion. Let's tell the DeSantises of the world, yes, we want to talk about critical race theory. We want to talk about our backgrounds and what Black people have experienced and what white people and what Jews and what other groups have experienced. Let's not hide it. Let's not. These are issues that need to be dealt with. And I think once we get it more out in the open, and as I meant when I said laugh at each other, I meant laugh with each other, at each other in a sense, as the Marx Brothers again, Duck Soup, the absurdity of all, and that brings us together. So I think that would be the first step. And I try to do this in my class oftentimes. A course I might teach an intergroup relations, in which I have a very, very diverse group. Each student, I will say, tell us about your own background, your grandparents, your parents. How did they get here? What was their story in the old country? What did they experience? And then tied in to whoever else is in the class and their experience. And that's how I think you bring people together. That's what we need to do. We need leadership to help us do that. And you're one of our leaders in a sense. The
Uh,
comedians, the satirists, the radical imagination people are also people that help us do this.
what kind of things in your life make you feel fulfilled?
I'm really been blessed to have gotten married. We just celebrated our 7th anniversary with Beatty, who you know very
Yes.
well, and she's a true life force and positive energy and so on, and enormous love and capacity to make me very happy and people around her too. She just is that way. And we've known each other in the past, and we she took a couple of detours and have now met again, and it's been a real blessing. I think also what's been very gratifying is I've always very much enjoyed my academic work and scholarship and so on, that intellectual life, but I also have very much enjoyed becoming more active. It's not that I hadn't been before. I was involved in the first Vietnam summer protest as a kid in high school. I've been always involved, but particularly the last dozen years or so ago, uh, when I got arrested with Cornel West and others protesting stop and frisk, and it was an incredible moment where a rite of passage. I have not been bar mitzvahed, but I suppose,
That was your bar mitzvah, right?
yeah, I was
Your
like a bar
secular bar
mitzvah.
mitzvah.
And it's the courage to act. And Marx calls it praxis, but it's to put yourself on the line. Reverend Barber talks about stand in the breach. Who is going to speak truth to power? Now, that doesn't mean I'm not putting myself up at some pedestal, but man, here you are, you're out there, the police are going to come, they're coming. This was in Harlem. We were protesting stop and frisk in front of the precinct there, and the community was cheering and this and that. And I said, wow, okay. And you take that step, or they help you into the paddy wagon. But it was a brilliant experience. And in the jail cell, we all sang together, and it was, what did we sing? Motown songs. And I'm sure we sang a few Tina Turner songs too. Working for the
Yeah.
Man, night and day. And so this is how we are all needful of each other. We're not alone here. And I think the more we connect and the more we see our connections, and even in the face of a possible injury, maybe or hurt, it's what we need to do.
I like how you bring people together and how you always try to get people, persuade people, inspire people to look at individuals, to know people as individuals, because I think that will go so far, a long way towards improving other larger problems when people look at others as individuals instead of so many labels. So I think you do a lot to help that along.
I agree. And again, you do that too. And I think our heroes and comrades, the Marx Brothers, and particularly Harpo Marx, who I know we
Yes.
both love. Perhaps it's hard to rank them, but I mean they all have their
Oh,
different.
he's definitely my favorite of the Marx
Yeah,
Brothers.
I
Yeah.
mean, that soul that when he starts playing, it's the harp or the piano. Everything else stops. The world stops, and you could see the children around him, and we're all children in a sense, in awe, and they look at their faces and so on. And yeah, that's what we need to have much more of, what Cornell calls radical love. And that's what Harpo is doing. And that's what you're doing. And we all need to do much, much more of it.
I agree. And everybody here, all our viewers, should definitely check into and watch the Radical Imagination, Jim's wonderful series. So I'll
Thank
put
you.
the link down there. Make sure to go and enjoy those episodes and subscribe there. And so, Jim, it's been a great pleasure having you here as my guest today.
Same here. And if I had just one second,
Sure.
because I don't want
Yeah.
to. My next week, I'm actually doing a show with Pearl Daly, Pearls Daly, who's a wonderful burlesque performer who also brings people together. So we have Pearls Daly and Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Oh yes, we don't want to miss that.
So we need to have that sort of diversity and variety and so on.
Sounds great.
Thank you so very, very much. It's been an honor and a pleasure to be on with you, Jonathan.
Well, likewise. So if you've enjoyed this interview, viewers out there, and why would you not, then make sure to subscribe to this channel right now if you haven't done so, and hit that notification bell so that you will be notified of uploads of a lot of other interviews with fascinating people coming up. And make sure right here on this channel to watch Casanoir if you have not yet watched my newly released short film, winner of, at last count, 26 awards in international film festivals. For the time being, it's free right here on the YouTube channel, so don't miss it, Casanoir, as well as the Trillo Suede web series, also winners of countless dozens of awards in film festivals, right here on the channel to enjoy it. Lots of other videos as well. So, Jim, thanks again. It's been great to have you here. Make sure to subscribe to Jim's series, The Radical Imagination. Link will be below this video. Till next time, see you soon.
Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan, so much. All the best.